Hello and welcome to another episode of Your Archetypes with Janet Boyer. I'm your host, and today we are going to be talking about the Bitch Archetype and AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Now, is there really such thing as a bitch archetype? No, and here's why. What somebody might call a bitch is basically a set of traits that upsets them. Now, an archetype is a pattern that you can pretty much spot in any culture, during any time, in any myth, any fairy tale collection. You know, it's the mother, the king, the judge, the detective, the warrior. They're things that are universal, and that's what an archetype is, an archetypal pattern. But a bitch is not. A bitch is basically very subjective, and it's usually a set of traits that render a woman powerful. And as you know, women in most cultures, patriarchal cultures, were subjected to being put down, told to stay home, be barefoot and pregnant. There are some religions, like some fundamentalist Christian strains, that feel a woman's place is at home and in servitude to her husband and family, and basically be a baby machine until her body can't do it anymore. But with the 60s and the rise of the feminist movement and the suffragette movement, women started to reclaim their power on a wider scale, in a more social, governmental scale. And that, of course, bled into the workforce and at home. And so, okay, if bitch is not an archetype, what is it? Well, I believe that there's 3 traits that tend to draw fire from men and women, both, especially when a woman has these kind of traits. I think it's getting better. However, with the recent tiff between Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Democrat from New York, and a Florida Republican Representative Ted Yoho, AOC has went on record saying that Representative Yoho accosted her on the steps of Congress outside and basically called her crazy, dangerous, and a bitch. And she gave an eloquent speech saying that that should just not be acceptable, to be accosted like that and to be called names. And she said, you know, I am someone's daughter. And apparently, previous Yoho tried to defend himself by saying he was married and he had daughters. And as AOC pointed out, just because you're married or even have daughters does not mean that you won't and don't accost women, or perhaps even abuse them. I mean, it goes, you know, for her it was verbal abuse, but usually if you're going to be that outspoken verbally, who knows how far it goes in terms of abuse at home when no one's looking. After all, abuse has to start somewhere, correct? So the 3 traits that I've isolated, because believe me, I've been called a bitch many times. Actually, there's probably more, like 4. Yeah, I'm gonna do the 4th one first, and it just occurred to me, is confidence. For some reason, insecurity, I suppose, and fear, some people do not like confident females. They don't like a woman who knows who she is and knows where she's going. And basically that is what confidence is to know yourself and to know where you're going, and to be self-possessed and pretty much run your life on your own terms according to your own values, as opposed to societies or spouses, religions, etc. So I would actually say that the first trait is confidence. A confident woman sometimes draws the accusation of being a bitch. The second one is independence. You know, one of the terms I like for bitch is babe in total control of herself. I like that in that acronym. You know, some People don't like independent women. For one, an independent woman cannot be controlled. They are not swayed or deterred for long by things like name-calling, shunning, or trends. And thankfully, somebody like AOC, she is not allowing that to be put, to break her or keep her down. She's just keep going at it for the people in her district in New York, as have many women who have been called names. Independent women are usually just fine being single as well, or they're in a relationship where they are equals. And an independent woman may also be a trailblazer, an innovator, or a visionary. And again, for some reason, those types of women can get called bitches. Number 3 is outspoken. An outspoken woman especially, who speaks out on issues that concern her or affect her, and she's not afraid to speak her mind or be blunt. Yikes. Of all the traits, perhaps that's the one that is called a bitch the most. And some people just can't handle women speaking forthrightly or logically even. Women for so long have been portrayed, and some women have bought into it and acted like the victim or the damsel that needs rescued. And instead of being honest and forthright with what they feel, they'll cry, manipulate, passive-aggressive tactics and what have you. And of course men can do this too, don't get me wrong. But women have participated in this mostly because probably they were conditioned that to be outspoken is to be called names, is to be shunned. Back in the 50s, to be outspoken, well, for one, you might get your mouth backhanded by your father or your mother, but it was basically just frowned upon, to speak. A woman is much like children, or to be seen and not heard. She's supposed to be arm candy. Definitely not someone to have a mind of her own. And the 4th one is clear boundaries. A woman that has clear boundaries has no trouble saying no. And interestingly, some people who are told no by a woman automatically call her a bitch. Isn't that interesting? And if you go by all of these traits that I have, pointed out, in a man, they would be admired in many cases. But if a woman has them, well, she's just a bitch. And then that means we can just dismiss what she is saying or what she stands for or what her ideas are. It's just a way to try to, swat these women away with the back of the hand as if they were just a pesky mosquito. And also as a part of clear boundaries is defending them when someone repeatedly tries to violate them. Just like AOC did on the House floor, she gave this impassioned speech for, 10, 15 minutes about how no woman should have to be accosted like that and to be called names. And she was right. And interestingly, I posted on Instagram about this and just, a couple thoughts, about how AOC, is called a bitch, and, that there's really not a bitch archetype, but, and I just, applauded her and linked to her speech on the House floor. Well, I had one of my Instagram followers say, yeah, she is crazy. She is a bitch. She is dangerous. And I was like, oh my gosh. And so no doubt this person's an MAGA, and I immediately deleted the person because, even if you strongly disagree with someone, and I understand that AOC is a strong personality, and strong personalities are polarizing. And, that's, again, what is called a bitch. I mean, usually if you're independent, if you're confident, if you're outspoken, and you have clear boundaries, well, the whole package is considered, a bitch. And it's a shame because when discussions are thrown out the window and respectful interaction is thrown out the window, instead, reaching for the lowest common denominator of calling names, then there is no meeting of the minds, there is no progress, there's no understanding. And, this person went and repeated those offensive names and said, well, she wasn't so busy showboating instead of working for, the people in her district. And I'm thinking, gosh, I'm always seeing her working for her district from all of her Facebook updates. And it's like, why is she showboating? Is it because she wore a red jacket? Is that why? Like a red blazer on her outfit because she had bright red lipstick? What's the showboating? But if guys do that, then what? Then what's that called? Is that called persuasive? Is that called charismatic? Is it called engaging? See, there's a major double standard. So, I wanted to do this podcast to share that no, there is no bitch archetype. However, there are more masculine patterns that often draw women, or women who have these archetypes have these embedded traits. And so while there's not a bitch archetype, there are some sets of masculine type energies that might, end up causing a woman to be called a bitch. For example, there's a judge archetype, and the judge is, an archetype where the energy is balancing justice and compassion. It manages the fair distribution of power. It's a person who is logical and clear-minded and has no trouble seeing a situation and then logically saying what they believe on those issues. And a legislator, is actually, a part of that legal aspect. So a judge could be a legislator as well, which AOC definitely is. And so she definitely has that logical mind where she is trying to fight for equality in the people of her district. But as I was saying earlier, you may disagree with someone's policies. But, if you want to engage into the discussion of the policies, don't call them names. Don't call them bitch and then just dismiss them. Bring up the parts that you disagree with and say why you disagree with. And a lot of people don't want to do that because it takes too much work. People don't want to have to think for themselves, and they sure as hell don't want to have to outline why they believe what they believe. And many people have not even examined why they believe what they believe. They have perhaps they have been influenced by certain types of media, by religion, by culture, by the political party, and they basically just regurgitate what, they allow into their life every day, and what they allow, to go on the TV or their news streams or the podcast or whatever, and so they basically regurgitate it. But the thing about that is that if somebody has a logical mind and they say, okay, well, fine, I understand you disagree. Tell me why you disagree and what you think would be a better solution. A lot of times they come up empty because they don't really know. They don't really know why they believe what they do. They are acting instinctually with that reptilian brain, or their gut instinct, or they're acting out of their wounds, and all they know is that person's a bitch. In other words, please shut up because you're triggering me. But they will never, unless a miracle occurs or they really truly dedicate themselves to self-examination, they'll never take the time to understand, why does this person trigger me so? Why does this person make me so angry that I'm willing to call her a bitch or crazy or dangerous out in public? We're so used to trolls and social media that now that seems like nothing to call people names. It's just, it's lazy, and of course it's troubling, but that's what a lot of people do. They don't really truly want to understand, and they truly don't want to have a meeting of the minds to bring solutions that would benefit the most people. They just want to play the black and white game of right and wrong, and if somebody is deemed wrong in their eyes, well, they just get called names. Another archetype that sometimes falls into the category of where someone might be called a bitch is a rebel. A rebel, and AOC is this too, they challenge authority to affect social change. And religious and spiritual wise, it could be someone who rejects spiritual systems that do not serve inner needs. And so those type of people with a rebel archetype may be called a bitch. Or a liberator, someone who tries to free themselves and others from outmoded beliefs, or tries to help people release negative thought patterns. They could be called a bitch. The avenger, a desire to balance the scales of justice, righteousness on behalf of society or oneself. That could be called a bitch. Some of the social justice warriors are automatically called a bitch. A warrior, which many women have. There's the strength, the skill, discipline, toughness of will. There's an element of heroism to the warrior, of stoicism and self-sacrifice, not only for others, but also in conquering the personal ego. That's the light shadow. And not so, it's getting to the point where, warriors are more accepted and they are seen as heroes, which is good. But those with the warrior archetype still may be called bitch because of those 4 things I've talked about before: confidence, independence, outspokenness, and having clear boundaries. A queen archetype, somebody that radiates the regal feminine and uses the benevolent authority to protect others. That person could be called a bitch. And again, I don't know if I've mentioned this, but archetypes are never all negative or all positive. Archetypes have a continuum. There's a light part of an archetype and a shadow part of an archetype. There is a positive and beneficial aspect to archetypal patterns, and there is a negative or detrimental aspect to archetypal patterns. And so the definitions I'm giving are the positive aspects of archetypes, but of course, there could be a shadow warrior, a shadow queen. A shadow queen might become arrogant when her authority is challenged, or she might be, controlling and demanding. And so, there's a line there between the archetypal pattern and then, of course, certain personality traits. A destroyer archetype, and a lot of times that's a flip side of the creator archetype. A destroyer releases what's potentially destructive. They help prepare for a new life. It might be a permutation of the phoenix archetype. That is another one that may, be called a bitch, or even a visionary. Someone with a capacity to envision what is not yet conceivable to others. You say you see something and other people don't see it. Well, it makes people afraid. There's a willingness to proclaim a vision without regard for personal gain, and that, of course, is, the light aspect of visionary. Obviously, if someone were to be a shadow visionary, they would sell their insights to the highest bidder, or they would compromise their vision to make it more acceptable. And so I just thought I'd share some archetypes that are kind of masculine: rebel, judge or legislator, liberator, avenger, warrior, queen, destroyer, visionary. Some of those patterns may, especially if they are embodied by a woman, may earn the name bitch, unfortunately. And that's because all of them are change makers, and they all can threaten the status quo. And how people are with change. They do not want to change many people. And if somebody threatens that, they lash out, or they become afraid. And when people are afraid, they can be the dangerous ones. And so now, a lot of women are being heralded as heroes, like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the Supreme Court Justice, or the notorious B.I.G. She is being revered, and many people admire her and other people in authority. Sandra Day O'Connor, who used to be on the Supreme Court, and now Sonia Sotomayor and Elena Kagan. And so now they're becoming powerful women who are in legislative or judiciary or women CEOs were powerful roles, and they're becoming role models. Even Barbie, the Barbie doll, has changed its tact. Instead of the big boobs and the skinny body, now there's things like astronaut Barbie and engineer Barbie and what have you. And so now women are becoming more comfortable not only embracing traditionally masculine type careers, ones that are more logical and mathematical perhaps, but also ones that are more aggressive, like a CEO or entrepreneur. And so, we're giving girls, some more options decade by decade, but it's just unfortunate that there are still those, both male and female, that are threatened by power, especially when a woman has it, that they have to call her a bitch. And so I hope you found this podcast on the bitch archetype that doesn't really exist, as we covered, in AOC and Women in Power. I hope you found it insightful and helpful, and I look forward to sharing more archetypal patterns and insights with you in the future. Bye for now.